Okay, so for our introduction of what's happening, we have two speakers with us today at the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Committee of Hancock County. We're really happy to have Chief Deputy Jason Trundy from the Waldo County Sheriff's Department and Community Liaison Rob Porter, also from the Waldo County. Is from the Sheriff's Department, or how do you define that, Rob?
I work out of the Sheriff's Department, but I'm paid by Volunteers of America, who is paid by the Waldo County Sheriff's Department. So
Oh, okay.
it's a little confusing with the logistics of it. So,
but that's okay. That's part of what we're here to understand
yes.
more of. So that's great. And they are going to be talking about the Community Liaison Program in Hancock County and the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Pilot. And both of these provide avenues for non-law enforcement professionals to assist officers with calls involving substance use disorder and mental health. And with that, I'll turn it over to the two of you.
All right. Well, what I'll do is I'll try to provide you with a little history, I guess, in story format, leading you from where we got started, why I pursued these programs, the partners that we use to do that, and the mechanisms that we use to do it, and kind of where we are today and where we hope to be in the future. So, Jamea, you made a comment about one of the quotes in one of the news articles where I talked about my experience as an officer and the things that I've seen affecting my decisions about why I pursued these programs or instituting these programs. And that is accurate. I mean, as a young deputy, I think I experienced what every law enforcement officer experiences, which is seeing a lot of the same faces over and over and over again, oftentimes for the very same types of problems. One of the other things that really influenced my decision to try to push in this direction was not just the fact that we saw same people over and over and over again, but as a law enforcement officer, sometimes I feel like people have lost sight of exactly what it is we do. Most of us have a personality that is conducive to do this type of work. We seek out education and training and experience around the enforcement of criminal laws. But when we hit the street, what we tend to end up doing is about 80% social work. The vast majority of the calls for service that we go on, a crime has not been committed. That doesn't mean that there's not conflict or that there isn't substance use or mental illness or poverty or homelessness or some other social issue driving our contact with these individuals, but there hasn't been a crime committed. So, but we have filled a lot of that role, and I think the community as a whole, the legislature has built these expectations around what law enforcement can or should do. And I guess I personally have a different view of that. I view that law enforcement should be focused on enforcement of laws and public safety through the tools that we have, which typically is arrest and incarceration. And we need to find a way, but we still need to respond in some meaningful way to all of these social issues that we're encountering constantly. But they really, in my opinion, are outside of the scope of our training and our experience. And I felt an incredible amount of frustration as a young deputy, and I'll just give one example. I don't know how many times during my career as a criminal investigator, for several years during that time I was assigned to Maine Drug Enforcement, I would have parents call me and say, my child is suffering from addiction and they've stolen some of my checks or they've stolen some of our personal property. And I would have this conversation with them. I've had the same conversation with multiple parents over and over and over again. where they will say, I'll say, okay, I can arrest this person. And well, that's not what we want. We don't want our child arrested. They're suffering from addiction. We want them to get help. But they've called the police, and my tool is arrest and incarceration. That's what I've got in my toolbox to address this issue. It's not what they're looking for, but they're reaching out to someone, the only people that they can think of that might be able to possibly help them or point them in the right direction. So that's just an example of the number of times where you would run into people that they're experiencing either themselves or they have loved ones that are experiencing these different types of social issues. And they feel powerless to really help. They reach out to us, and the tools that we have in our toolbox really just don't always fit. You know, arrest and incarceration is a really important piece of public safety, but it doesn't answer every social issue that we encounter. And so as I have been looking around over time, and especially over the last 8 years after I got into the chief deputy's role where I could really affect policy, I really started looking around at how can we address these issues better? How can we do something? And I'll tell you right up front, I'm not the guy who has all the answers. I like looking around the country, around to my neighbor counties, and finding out what other people are doing that seems to be effective, and trying to fit those ideas into what might work here in Waldo County. So I'll back up to about 2017-18. We run the Men's Reentry Center here in Waldo County, not a traditional correctional facility. So we have some partners there that help us provide programming to the men in the reentry center. Primarily that's done through Volunteers of America and the Restorative Justice Project, and a number of other community organizations, all focusing around either treatment for substance use, mental illness, employment, all kinds of different social programming that these individuals may need as they transition back into the community. So there was a group of us that were holding informal conversations back then. And we were talking about primarily like, how can we work together better? How can we break down some of these silos? Because we all tend to work in silos, and very seldom do we collaborate or cooperate with one another. So the conversation really was amongst a bunch of our friends here, and we were just talking about how do we do better with this? And so again, I started looking around, and I found that Lincoln County had a collaborative that they had created a year or so before that. Their membership was a little different, but along the same lines. They had been having these very same conversations, and they got a group of different organization members together, started meeting on a regular basis, just talking about how can we do something better, how can we collaborate. So we pulled together a group of 6 of us. It was myself from the sheriff's office, Ray Porter from the reentry center, a representative from Volunteers of America, the Restorative Justice Project, GBAM, which is the Greater Bay Area Ministerium, which represents 13 local area churches, and the Department of Probation and Parole had a representative there, as well as treatment providers from Seaport Community Health, which is our county's largest substance use treatment provider, and they operate under the umbrella of PCHC. So we got together and we created a group called the Waldo County Recovery Committee. And we simply committed ourselves to get together every week, regardless of what the agenda looked like, to just engage each other in conversations about what can we do to reduce stigma, what can we do to support people in recovery, what can we do to help people that are in active addiction find recovery, support family members and other affected participants. We were just looking to find a way to impact and to cooperate with each other in a better way, to try to break down some of those silos and cooperate. And so from that initiative, we met every week, and there were times where the agenda was light, and there were times where it was heavy. All kinds of different things have sprung out of that partnership. And I don't probably have enough time to talk about all of it, but everything from job fairs to recovery train rides to monthly community conversations around different topics, to panel discussions, to community support groups, just a wide variety of things that this group got together and started initiating. Probably for this conversation, one of the biggest things that happened was our partner PCHC took the model that we had of collaboration, because as the 6 of us got together, we opened those meetings to the public. It was any organization or individual that felt like they needed some help. We had some individuals come in from the community, business owners that were experiencing employees that were suffering from addiction. We had organizations, again, treatment providers. We have a bunch of substance use treatment providers, mental health treatment providers, just all kinds of folks coming to these meetings, probably 15 or 20 different agencies over the last 4 or 5 years that have come in or gone out at different times for different reasons. But we all just started collaborating together. And so PCHC looked at this model of what we were trying to do to collaborate with one another, and they applied for a HRSA grant. So they and I can get the information for anybody that wants to know what HRSA stands for and all of that. Our corp. Let me. I brought it up, but then it disappeared on me. So here we go. So PCHC applied for a HRSA grant, which is Health Resources and Services Administration. Applied for their RCORP grant, which is Rural Communities Opioid Response Program. So it's a federal grant. They got $1 million 3-year grant to basically support and enhance the work of this collaborative. As part of that grant, they named different recovery committee groups as subrecipients, the Sheriff's Office being one, BOA being another. And of course, within their network of treatment providers, bolstering some of their services they had available. They also sent some money to the Restorative Justice Project. So particularly the money that was coming through the Sheriff's Office at the time, when we first started talking about this, we had thought about expanding our pretrial services with Maine pretrial, because our caseload in Maine pretrial was getting really way too high for the one person that we had as case manager. We were exceeding 100 people out on either pre or post conviction supervision through Maine pretrial. And that caseload was way too much for one person. It got to the point where that caseload was enough so that we ended up including in our budget a second position with Maine pretrial. So when they finally did get the grant, we had funding for a position that had already been filled. So during that time, I had gone to the governor's opioid conference in Augusta and a couple of other different meetings around the opioid crisis. And I had heard the folks down at Portland PD speak about their behavioral health program, where they have what I call a community liaison. They have different names for it there. They'd had that program for like 20 years. It's large enough where their behavioral health program in the PD has actually 2 divisions within it, one addressing co-responders specifically around mental illness and the other one around substance use. But I looked at that model and thought to myself, what a great idea to have somebody, a civilian with specialized training around substance use or mental illness, to be able to co-respond with the deputies. And as I'm thinking about my experience over many years, and going into these situations with what I felt like was a lack of tools to really respond to the needs that I was seeing, I thought, you know what? I know that I can't train police officers to be social workers. That's not what we do. But if I had one right alongside of me that could take over and do that work as a co-responder, that would be fantastic. So I pitched that idea to PCHC. They pitched it up to the folks at RCorp, who quickly said, absolutely. And that's when I reached out to our other partner in that grant, BOA. So I had a choice at that time. I could have tried to make that position a county employee, which would have created all sorts of different issues. One being it would have been far more expensive with our what we would have had to pay in benefit packages that we offer. I did not have the funds to do that, but I knew that if I partnered through Volunteers of America, that they would be able to provide that type of service for the funds that we had available through the grant. And they were already a partner in the grant process, so it was very easy to just pull them in. And so between PCHC, Volunteers of America, and the Sheriff's Office, we created a outline for what we call a community liaison based on Portland's program that fit our budget. And Rob was the person that we originally hired under that grant. So when we took that grant, obviously our court grant really focuses a lot on the opiate crisis. And the grant really wanted us to focus on co-response around substance use. We kind of grafted in the mental health side of this thing because oftentimes what we've experienced is that these are co-occurring disorders. And so we kind of dragged a little bit of that in there, and we ran it for the first year. Of course, we got the grant, and within probably a month or so, COVID exploded, and we were trying to start a brand spanking new program under a COVID lockdown, and we couldn't put Rob in the car with people, and it certainly slowed the process. But we were able to create a referral process where we were able to see, I believe, a lot of benefit from having Rob in that position for the first year, responding to different situations in the community. Enough so that I approached the sheriff about including enough funds in our budget to secure a community liaison position that was budgeted, so that I didn't have to worry about losing it at the end of that 3-year cycle. We were able to do that. So we moved Rob into that budgeted position within our budget structure, which opened up the opportunity to backfill the grant funded position, which we did. So that gave us effectively 2 liaisons. The other thing that happened in the years since then is that obviously the state of Maine has started the options program. And the options program was a grant fund started by Governor Mills to basically put what I refer to as a community liaison in every single county. When they created that grant, they were looking for host agencies for those individuals. We agreed that the Sheriff's Office would serve as the host agency for the Waldo County options caseworker. Sweetser got that grant, and they hired someone, a fantastic young lady that came on, and we quickly scooped her up and brought her into our regular meetings of our liaisons, and she works right alongside of us. Again, her focus primarily on opioid-based calls or calls that deal with some mental health. But we've been able to bring her kind of into the fold and put her to work alongside of some of our other liaisons in these co-response situations. One of the reasons I just want to touch on quickly that I really wanted to create a budgeted position. I wanted to ensure that we kept it beyond the grant funding, which is going to end at the end of this year. But there was another reason that I wanted to do that. As I look back over time and I look at all of the different types of situations that I encountered as a young deputy on the road, I know that substance use and mental illness are huge drivers to people coming into contact with the criminal justice system. But I also recognize that they are not the only issues that are out there. And the grant funding that we got, although it got us started and it got us some data to get going to show that these are valuable programs, I recognize that, or I believe that there are a lot of other opportunities that we could use a liaison for, and way beyond those 2 specific issues. And some of my beliefs around that involve, conflict. And very few calls that we go on do not involve some form of conflict, whether it's landlord-tenant disputes or child custody disputes, property line disputes. It doesn't matter. There's always somewhere along the line there's conflict in a large percentage of the calls that we have, and that is part of why, again, from the recovery committee process, one of our partners became Health Equity Alliance out of Bangor. The executive director and I decided together to apply for a substance use disorder grant coming out of the state to implement a LEAD program, which is the other program that we've talked about here. The LEAD program, again, it was another idea that we stole from somewhere else. There are about 70 sites across the country right now that use some form of a law enforcement assisted diversion. If anybody's interested in learning more about that, you can go to a website called the LEAD Bureau, LEAD Bureau. They are a national organization that provides technical assistance to all of those sites across the country. Fantastic group of people. So that movement, the LEAD movement program, started out of the Seattle area and has been kind of adopted across the country. So we looked at that model, and what that model is basically it provides a case manager for patrol to basically be able, if they encounter someone that was going to be arrested, this is the way it started in Seattle. It was if they encountered someone that had, say, a small amount of possession of drugs on them, so a minor drug offense, instead of simply charging them with possession, they would try to get them connected with case management services offered through the LEAD program. So it was an arrest diversion program. What they quickly realized in Seattle was that these officers were coming into a contact with a lot of people that were in active addiction. But again, there wasn't necessarily an arrestable offense there. So what do you do with those folks that still could utilize these services? When they had someone go out and commit a crime so that they could get into the program, they realized they needed to do something a little different. So they created what they call a social referral. So when a deputy realizes, or their patrol officer realized, hey, this person's in addiction and they're looking for some help, they could connect them through a social referral to the case management services. Now, the case management services differ a little bit from what Rob is doing. Rob is really a resource broker in the moment, co-responding with law enforcement, short term, 1, 2, 3 day kind of thing, where he's working with someone to try to get them connected to a resource that they need to address those underlying issues and that have caused them to come into contact with the criminal justice system. The LEAD case management services are really designed to be there long term for someone, 6 months, a year, year and a half, whatever it takes, long term, to follow them, to help provide them with the support they need to make sure that they not only get connected to those services, but they stay connected and that they stay away from contact with the criminal justice system. Both of these programs really are designed to provide more tools to the officers on the street, a better, quicker response, a more appropriate response to the social needs that we're encountering, and ultimately with the goal that we steer these people away from the criminal justice system, away from a situation that ultimately leads to arrest or incarceration. I firmly believe that our jail systems have become de facto substance use treatment programs and mental health facilities, because these individuals tend to come into contact with us, and the minute they break the law, it seems like it's like, well, if they're in jail, they're safe. And that's not the answer, in my opinion. So our ultimate goal with these programs, steer people away from the criminal justice system, steer them to the resources they need, and keep them out of our jails. So those are kind of the programs as they got started. The future is what I see when I was referring to the possibilities in the future. We've actually developed here a training program. It was based on our law enforcement training program to try to train our CLOs to understand, at least at a quick blush, what some of the criminal laws may look like that they may encounter. So they would know what an assault might look like, or what a harassment might look like, or a criminal trespass might look like. We cover a whole bunch of things in this training program about safety on scenes and all kinds of other things that they need to know. But part of what we're working ourselves toward is trying to utilize these individuals in situations that don't necessarily have a nexus specifically to substance use and mental illness. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we're starting with are welfare checks, or wellness checks. So we have a lot of calls where people will ask us, can you go check on my elderly mother? She lives there in Waldo County and I can't get her on the phone. We have a program through dispatch that's what we call the friendly caller program. Folks that are senior in our community can call in once a day, check in with dispatch to let them know that they're okay. If the dispatchers do not hear from them, they call them to check on them to say, hey, are you okay today? Sometimes when dispatch doesn't hear from someone, tries to call them several times, can't make contact, they will call the sheriff's office and say, we need a check done on some so-and-so. We haven't been able to make contact with them. So we do a friendly call or check and go to their home and make sure they're okay. And there have been times when they have not been. So we have these welfare checks and wellness checks, whatever you want to call them, that are done on a regular basis. Oftentimes we're encountering individuals that, there's a reason why someone's concerned about them. Oftentimes these individuals are senior. Sometimes there are mental health issues there. So my thought is they rarely ever have anything to do with crime being committed. There are usually social issues underneath of these. And so we plan on trying to utilize our liaisons to do as many of those as humanly possible, as long as they can do it safely and there's no issue there around safety of the liaison. So they'll check on folks, make sure that they're okay. And if there are underlying issues, some of these, I can think of some where we've gone and there have been seniors who they're out of heating fuel. They're starting to suffer from some dementia issues or memory issues, and they seem to be losing their faculties. They don't have families around to help take care of them. Some people just don't know quite where to go or where to turn to get help, or they're too proud to do it. And so when you send a deputy there, the deputy is primarily focused on, are you okay? Are you alive? And if the person is alive and there's another call on the board they need to go to, they're going to, they may call adult protective, they may do something like that as a follow-up, but they're off to the next call. I want somebody that can actually go to these calls, take a few minutes, sit down with this person. Hey, do you have family? Can I help? Can I get someone to come here from adult protective to talk with you? Work with this person maybe over a few days, whatever it might take to get them connected with, general assistance, whatever it takes to get that person so that they're stable and they're safe in their home. So that's just like one area where we're looking, where I just think there's a ton of potential moving forward for these positions to provide a better service long term. And I will stop talking and let somebody else go or answer questions.
Do we have questions that anybody would like to ask? And then I want to ask Rob what he'd like to put in about how it's been working here, but maybe this is a good moment for questions specific to what Jason has just been talking about.
This is Larry from Bangor, and I just put in the chat my question, which is there anybody thinking on the same lines that you're thinking, Jason, in Penobscot County that we could talk to about it? We do have connections with both Health Equity Alliance and PCHC, but I haven't heard of anybody really looking at this issue there. Now, you've talked about liaisons around the state, so maybe there is somebody. I just don't know who those folks are. Any names and contact information would be a big help.
Sure, I will tell you that Health Equity Alliance, the executive director and I are the two that kind of, in all honesty, the prior executive director, Kenny Miller of Health Equity Alliance, he was the guy that really sat down and crafted the entire body of the grant. The guy's awesome. So it had to be a law enforcement agency that submitted the grant. So he created the entire grant. I submitted it. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Kenny is no longer there with Health Equity Alliance, and they got a new executive director. And with the new director, they wanted to realign some of their priorities. And so they basically told us they would not be able to move into the second year of funding with us, providing the case management portion. One thing I should say, when we created that grant, Health Equity Alliance created the case management portion of this for folks that were being diverted. But we also built into that grant a conflict resolution piece, and we brought in Restorative Justice Project in the Midcoast to help us with that. Restorative Justice Project actually created a conflict resolution team that operates on restorative principles, so that deputies dealing with folks in the community that were having consistent conflict issues, if the parties were interested and willing, we could refer them to our JP to go through that process to resolve that conflict and hopefully, again, steer them away from repeated calls to law enforcement to address the issues. So after the first year, we had to rethink our case management side of that. I turned again to our partners at Volunteers of America because we've got a almost 15-year partnership with them, and they're an incredibly stable organization. And they did what they always do. They came in and they put something together really quickly and saved that entire portion, that case management portion of this contract for us. And so currently, Volunteers of America is our partner in that grant with Restorative Justice around the case management side. So as far as Bangor goes, the reason that we started this process with Health Equity Alliance was, at the time, they were the only organization in the state that was operating a lead program. And they had started it a few years before that in Bangor with the Bangor Police Department. So that's why I turned to them as one of our partners, because they had some experience with it. I do not know if they are still operating that program in Bangor at the police department. Someone at Health Equity or the Bangor Police Department may be able to answer that question for you. But if you ask me who across the state of Maine could act as a resource for you, the agencies that I am aware of right now, obviously, are Volunteers of America. They're the ones that have helped us build this model here. And down in Portland, if you get a hold of the Portland Police Department, you'll see that if you research Portland Police Department Behavioral Health Unit, you will see that they have been part of a national model. There's a number of organizations or police departments across the country that have used their model. They've been a model agency for that program for a number of years. They were very helpful in providing us with all kinds of documentation about how they've structured their program and what it looks like. The struggle I found with Portland was that they are in the police department, part of the police department, and very well structured because they're like a 20+ year organization there, institution within the PD. So they have a very well established model that's very well funded, and obviously a much higher call volume to respond to. So we had to find a way to kind of pare that model down to something that fit us as we were just trying to get started, and obviously responding to a much smaller number of calls for service initially. So I know there are some other efforts around the state. I don't necessarily know, maybe Rob would have a better idea of other organizations that are running anything close to what we're doing, but I'm really familiar with Volunteers of America. And if you wanted to talk to somebody there, I can put you in contact with probably Robin Goff, who is our regional director between us and Knox County.
Thank you very much. Larry, does that get at what you wanted to get at? Do you have more?
That's fine. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. And there's a couple of contact info pieces in the chat that I'll follow up on also. Thanks.
Okay, great. And Rob, would you like to talk some about from your perspective, how it is for you, what you do?
So I guess how I'm going to approach this is talk a little bit about from a personal standpoint and how it got into a professional standpoint. So for the probably first 36 years of my life, I was involved with drugs a lot and alcohol a lot and crime a lot. And spent pretty close to 30 years of my life, all total, not all at once, but all total, in and out of the Department of Corrections throughout the state of Maine. More recently, I got sentenced to 12 and a half years for crimes that centered on substance use and trying to support my substance use. And towards the end of that sentence, well, during that sentence, I realized that something was not working in my life, obviously. And I did some major turnarounds in my life. One was to gain an education, to learn, why was my thinking so much different than other people's thoughts about how to approach life and how to be around people and such as that. So I took a couple of college classes, philosophy and ethics related classes, and I realized that my worldview was so off from other people's worldview. And then that led to learning about restorative practices and understanding what that was and starting to practice it. And I ended up at the Reentry Center in 2011 up in Belfast. And I got to tell you, that program was a program that probably saved my life. After I got out of there, about a month later, I graduated with a mental health and human services degree, a bachelor's degree. And about a month after that, I got a job up in Augusta working for Kennebec Behavioral Health as a homeless outreach case manager. So for about 7 years of my life after being released, I did a lot of case management for a couple of different agencies throughout the state. Back in 2019, I moved back to Belfast, got hired as a case manager for a company called Broadreach Family Services. A month after being hired, they went bankrupt, and then I got hired by another local behavioral health agency, and they asked me to if I was interested in being a substance use counselor in their opioid health home program, and I was, and went and got certified. I'm currently a CADC. Going to have my LADC here as soon as they process my application and I sit for the test, which, I'll probably pass because I'm pretty good at that stuff. And so I did that for about 2 years. And at that time, that's about the time that Jason and Volunteers of America started posting a job called the Community Liaison. Robin reached out to me, and I had a long discussion with her. And part of that discussion was that I was worried about, getting a job working at the sheriff's department with my past. And part of what the discussion centered on was that they were trying to think, and I'm sure Larry will understand this, thinking outside the box. And part of that was that, a lot of people who have what we call life experience and have also done other things to work on making their life more stable and being able to help others with that experience is a valuable tool that a lot of people with just an education do not have. So, they were willing to give me a chance at this position, and I started, and then probably 2 weeks later, COVID hit. So it was an interesting process. And what I was able to do during that first year was I was able to build a lot of relationships within the sheriff's department and other local police departments. Them knowing who I was, knowing my past, but also knowing what we were trying to do. And obviously, Jason and had let his staff know what was happening and what they were trying to do. But there was a lot of buy-in with several of the officers, which made it a lot easier than I expected it was going to be. And there's been times where, there's a lot of times now where, before an officer will even go out to a call, they'll come to me and have a discussion with me about, if it's something that I would respond to with them, or if it's not necessary, how should they approach it? You know what I mean? Which is an interesting concept to me, them coming to me asking for advice, And I got to say that the success of this program is not, there is success in this program. Obviously, there's enough efficacy of the program that we were able to get this as a budgeted item within Waldo County. But this, we have to, sometimes even to the level of the deputies have to express to them, what success really looks like. To me, success is somebody just having a contact with me, and at least at that first point, initiating connection. Because to me, that's what this is about. It's about building connection with members of the community. Those members of the community that don't feel like they're connected for whatever reason, okay? And reducing the stigma of whatever their driver is. So, to me, addiction in itself is not a crime. Mental illness in itself is not a crime. At some point, the behaviors resulting from those two things may become a crime. Let's get in there and try to avoid it becoming to the level of a crime, or even if it gets to that level, let's understand how that crime occurred and maybe work with that person so that it doesn't happen again, or give them a chance so that they don't have this black mark on their record because of something they may not have been in control of. And, there's been success, and even to the point where some of the people, they may slam the door in my face, they may hang up the phone on me when I'm trying to reach them, but at some point we're going to come across them again, and we have. And sometimes they're more willing to listen to what we have to say and are willing to reach out for help. And that's where I see the success starting to happen. And it does take time. Just like an addiction is not, recovery is not a linear process. You may get 5 steps ahead, but at some point you're probably going to go back a couple of steps and then move 5 more steps ahead, and so on. That's the way this program is working, and that's how I'm looking at success. That there is a trend of moving upwards. At some point it may go down a little bit, but the overall trend is that it's moving forward and upwards. So that's what my experience is so far.
That's
I think
fantastic.
to Rob's point, it is very important that, anybody that decides to move into this type of a program, recognize or manage some expectations. Rob is absolutely right. This is not a magic wand. And we've struggled a little bit with that. The deputies are like, well, I referred them to Rob. Why is this person calling again? It's, Rob doesn't have any magic powder out there that can just, sprinkle it on there and the problems all go away. He has the same limitations that we do. If someone doesn't want to engage with him or us, we can't make them. If somebody doesn't want our help, we can't force them. Rob is absolutely right. It's about being there, trying to be connected when you can. Just like the reentry center, this program, the way I view success, is one person at a time. And I don't, in my role, I don't get to see what Rob is doing every day on every call. I'm not involved at that level. I'll give you an example though of something that, just one incident that I was involved in that just helps reinforce for me that, yeah, this is the right direction. So I happened to be the only person here one day. Rob was out that afternoon. A lady and her son came to the office and walking through the front door, looking for Rob. So knowing he wasn't there, I went out to talk to him, and they were pretty upset. This lady's other son suffered co-occurring disorders, has some mental illness going on, has some substance use going on. His condition was deteriorating, and they were really at a loss about what to do. They, the day before, they had called a local law enforcement agency to come and check on him because he had made some comments that concerned them that he may harm himself. An officer went out, met with him. It didn't go well because he doesn't respond well to police. And The officer basically determined, you know what, he's not a risk to himself or someone else, and left. And so the family, again, was left there with this, family member who was escalating, who they were really concerned about. His substance use and mental illness really getting bad. And so the mother had been given a business card for Rob by her son when he had been arrested on a prior incident. Rob happened to run into him in the correctional facility, gave him his business card, and said, "Hey, if you ever need anything, this is who I am and what I do." And when he got home, he gave that card to his mother. So and told her a little bit about the encounter he had. So the mother saw this business card and thought, "Why not? Let's see if this guy can help." So she came to the sheriff's office to find Rob. So when she explained to me what was going on, I said, "Well, Rob's going to be in the morning. Can you come back?" "Yes, we can." "All right." So the next morning, I go out, meet the family. They all come in, a couple of the children, the mother, and sat down with Rob and one of our other liaisons. And once they got started, I left and let them do what they do. Later on, I ran into Rob and I said, "So how did that turn out?" Turned out that they got together. They went to the house with the family. They sat down with this young man. He was far more receptive to sit and talk with family and a liaison, especially where they had met once before. Before the afternoon was over, they had not only convinced him that he needed to get into rehab and need to get himself stabilized, they were able to find and coordinate a detox facility that would take him and then transition him to a rehab facility. Liaison got into the vehicle with family members and this young man, and before the afternoon was over, he was at a detox facility in Augusta. So I look at those situations and I say, all right, you know what? I can try to collect data all day long over the course of however many years this program runs, and we can try to look at it on a large scale. Did we, affect 80% of our people? Whatever you want to look at for stats. But at the end of the day, I look at situations like that one, the one that I happen to be involved in, and we made a difference. We accomplished something through this liaison program that traditional law enforcement approaches was not able to. And one of the things that you can't put your finger on, and I don't think you'll ever be able to track, is what did you prevent, and what kind of a ripple effect have you caused? Does this young man get into treatment? Does he stay in treatment? Did we prevent him from overdosing? Did he we prevent his suicide? Did we, what did you prevent? You don't know that, but you know that you're making a difference. And for me, when I look at these things, that's what motivates me every day is, following some of these guys that have left the reentry center, families like this that we've been able to help, individuals that we've been able to get on a better path. That has value, and it has value to your community. And to their families and to a lot of stuff that you just necessarily can't always put your finger on. But at the end of the day, my view is that our job in law enforcement is to enhance public safety and quality of life. And through these partnerships, I feel like we're doing that. And that's where I see the value in it. It's not a magic wand. It's not going to cure every situation you encounter, but it is a tool in your toolbox that can, in the short term and long term, can make a difference.
And I would just add that, part of this is, I think this is one of the most important parts of this. It's about the connection, being able to build a relationship with somebody. Whereas, generally law enforcement is not there to build a connection with the person they're interacting with. That's not what their role is. I mean, in a way it is, but this is a little bit deeper connection, and not, it's about building a relationship where that individual can trust you to open up and say, yeah, I do need help, or yeah, this is going on, and what can I do? What can I do? And a lot of law enforcement officers, or the ones that I know anyways, in Waldo County, are willing to do that, but it does take up a lot of their time that they don't have to be able to work with the person at that level. And that's, I kind of, fashion it like the law enforcement as Batman with with their utility belt. They have all these tools on it, but they didn't have this tool that they could throw out there that was non-combative, open, willing to listen, able to provide resources. So that's, that's what I am, is I'm a tool for these guys, a good tool.
I have a question. Do we end at 11 or 11:30? I don't want to keep everybody too long.
11:30. So we have
Okay.
plenty of time.
Okay. This is really fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time. There's only a few of us in this meeting, but it's really helpful. You mentioned a Governor Mills project that supported some piece of your work. What was that called?
That's the options, OPTIONS, options. I don't remember what it stands for. Maybe Rob does, but it basically is a statewide grant. They actually advertise it on the radio. There should be an options caseworker in every single county.
I'll send you the link to your options caseworker, options liaison. Options stands for overdose prevention through intensive outreach, naloxone, and safety. It's a mouthful. That's why they use options.
Thank you. And then you mentioned that the LEAD program was the result of a conversation between, within the Waldo County Recovery Committee and a Bangor program. What was the program in Bangor that you were talking about?
One of the partners that we had at the time in the recovery group was Health Equity Alliance. And Health Equity Alliance, when I looked online at the LEAD Bureau site that Rob put up, I noticed that there was a star in Maine in Bangor. And so when I went to try to research like who's doing LEAD in Bangor, I realized, hey, it's Health Equity. And we had a relationship with them. So I reached out to them and said, hey, what are you doing in Bangor? That started a conversation about their work developing that LEAD program in Bangor. And I said, hey, I want that here. And so that led to Kenny Miller and I having the conversation. He's like, hey, there's this grant. And the next thing I know, he's got the application put together. We apply, we get it.
Perfect. Thank you. So my last question is just, I heard you talking earlier about, how you feel that liaisons like this can be applied to many more of the things that law enforcement get called to that may not rise to the, a criminal offense. And that there's also all this, there's safety concerns and safety training that go into bringing civilian people into that situation. What is your opinion about, I don't have an opinion at all, so I'm really asking, what is your opinion about liaisons of this type in domestic violence situations, in domestic violence calls or family conflict calls? It's hard to know going in, is it is somebody's life in danger or is it a fight? You know what I mean? And I'm curious what you think about that, especially because we know that there's so much, you're talking so much about co-occurrence. There's so much co-occurrence with substance use and conflict resolution and mental health issues all mixed up with domestic violence. I'm curious what you think. It looks like Robert has a.
Do you mind if I say something and then let you answer, Jason?
Yeah.
So part of the CLO training program is to teach us to recognize a criminal act, such as domestic violence and so on. And at that point, when we see that there's a crime happening or has happened, and recognize that, especially if it's not called in as a domestic violence situation, could be just, a welfare check. And when we get to the scene, if we're alone without law enforcement, then that's when, if we recognize that, we have direct contact with dispatch and say, hey, listen, we need law enforcement out here. There's a possible blah, blah, blah. And they will come out at that point and we'll withdraw from the scene, for our safety, So I think that's what is in the training program. And not obvious, but with my life experience, I'm able to recognize to some degree that there's something different going on than there's supposed to be, than what was called in to dispatch. So, that's just, a personal thing, and I'm able to do that. But with the other CLOs that may not have that life experience, that's where this training program is beneficial, and it's going to be great. We're not going to be responding direct if it's a direct domestic violence, at least until afterwards, when maybe the officer sees there's some substance use issues going on, and then we can come out at that point after the scene is safe and everything's been stabilized. Is that correct, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, I think we've got a pretty good handle on the response around substance use, mental illness piece.
Yeah.
We're moving very slowly and very cautiously into some of these other things like welfare checks and stuff. We really want to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe, that people, these liaisons, if they are responding before an officer, that, we can be as positive as humanly possible that this is not a dangerous situation, that it's more just a, social type issue. So we're moving very cautiously in that direction. We don't want to mess that up, because I think if you mess that up, you could risk the entire program.
Yeah.
Specifically about the domestic violence piece, it's funny that you asked that question, because I've been having a lot of those thoughts over the last year about this. My thought process really is focused on how do we get the right resource into the community to address the issue that's going on in the moment. How do we get the right resource there? Everybody looks at law enforcement as the first responder. Like, you're always there. You can respond to mental health calls. You can respond to domestics. You can respond. It doesn't matter what the issue is. You can respond to it, deal with it. My thought is, like, how do we shift that thought process and the structural systems to say, let's respond? I love New Hope for Women. They have office space in our building. Our local New Hope lady is fantastic. We have a great relationship with them, a great organization. But I look at it and I say, all right, so they've got this worker who I can give a coin, I can give a phone number, I can go to it. We respond to a lot of domestic disturbances that do not result in arrest. So we deal with them like we deal with everything else. We go, is there a crime? Oh, there's no crime here. I'm out. I got another call of service to go deal with. We haven't done anything to address the root cause of this problem. There's conflict, there's substance use, there's mental illness, there's whatever the social issues are that are driving that. We are very good in law enforcement at dealing with symptoms. Rob touched on that. A symptom of an underlying issue has resulted in a crime. We can deal with that. If there's no crime, I don't care about the underlying issue, I move on. But if we're thinking about this differently, we think, how do we get the right resource there to address those underlying issues so that it doesn't become a crime? And so I look at New Hope and I say, all right, here's a perfect example. They've got caseworkers that I can refer someone to days afterwards. Well, when the crisis is gone, are they going to pick up the phone and call? Maybe, maybe not. So I'm thinking, how do I get that person out of the office, and how do I get them out there in the field in the moment where they can actually, when there's a crisis and when somebody's open to hear the information, to respond to that? And so I've gone in, had several conversations with our local New Hope lady and said, if New Hope for Women has interest in creating some sort of a co-responder program, and I've identified several grants that I think could be used to do that. And I know that some of the Southern Maine organizations have that sort of embedded co-responder model. I would love to do that. So I've put that out there to New Hope, and I hope that as an organization, they consider that, because having at least one co-responder that could, maybe we could fit their schedule for that, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday kind of time scheme, in the evenings when we get our majority of calls, maybe we could get them out there to those family disturbance calls, offering some resources in the moment instead of just handing out a coin with a number on it. So I do believe that is another area where there's plenty of room.
I think that's very exciting. I'm so glad to hear it. And I think, really what I was asking is exactly that. Like, is domestic violence one of those situations where you would want a co-responder with an officer who's an advocate or a social worker or a social service provider who could, as you were saying, really build a relationship in the moment of crisis when a crime hasn't been committed, or even when a crime has been committed and you've successfully removed that person, there's an advocate there in real time to talk to the victim, you know?
So, absolutely.
And it's
Or
also
even the
having-
48-hour follow-ups. You know, all that continuum all the way through to be able to be as a resource. You know, we
Yeah.
initially, as we thought about like shifting liaisons toward other things, you know, we've talked about like, could we take our current liaisons, get them some specialty training with New Hope so that they could kind of act as a, but you know, it gets to the point where you're looking at a liaison and you're saying, all right, I can't necessarily have a liaison who specializes in mental health and substance use and domestic violence. You know, and eventually what I've done is I've created a liaison. I'm doing to a liaison what I'm trying to do to law enforcement, and I'm trying to make them a master of 100 trades, when that necessarily I don't think is the answer either. You know, we've got those organizations like New Hope. They've got the resources, they've got the training. We can create a partnership, get someone in there. You know, that's not going to provide 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week coverage. But just one 40-hour person for Waldo County could do a lot of work in that realm. If we
Yeah,
can
it could
just
catch a lot of people. I just finished a training the Strangulation Prevention Institute. I don't know if you've ever sent anybody to that advanced training, but it was really powerful talking about how domestic violence perpetrators, particularly those who use strangulation as a tactic, are the most likely to kill a police officer in any situation, not just in a DV call, but in a traffic stop, in a drug bust, anywhere. And so there's this really, you know, there was this, it was just a very powerful sort of call to law enforcement in other parts of the country that don't take DV as seriously as you clearly do, to, you know, think about how this really affects your own department. You know what I mean? And I think those multidisciplinary teams were strongly encouraged, and it was a very powerful training. I mean, it was about many things, but it was a very powerful training. And I just was wondering, you know, if you felt that having that, and you've already answered this question, but I appreciate your answer to this notion of having that advocate present would be valuable as a co-responder.
do.
So thank you. You said there were grants that you've identified that you've passed on to New Hope that might be able to support a position like this. Which ones were those?
Oh boy, I didn't.
You don't have to tell me now.
I can find it. It was in a. I have a whole bunch of emails that come through, and one of the substance use grants had a whole bunch of other ones, and it was a response to specifically a federal grant specifically to response for domestic violence.
Okay.
And when I read it, one of the state criteria I felt could fit that kind of a co-response model. If I can find that, I will send it over for you guys to distribute.
Thank you. I just put my email in the chat also. I really appreciate it. I know you're very busy. I don't want to make more work for you, but I really appreciate it if you come across it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions from folks here just now? Becky?
The concept of bias, do you work with that at all, or how do you find that affects your work with staff and with, you know, clients or whatever, you know, people you're dealing with? Is that part of this training? I forget the training thing you called it.
Can you clarify what are you a
Well,
specific
bias.
type of bias or?
Any type of bias, you know, that people's bias affecting their interactions with the public, or, you know, with what they're doing. Do you have models for that?
And can I add to that question maybe, Becky? Because I'm piggybacking on it because it was the thing I was going to ask if nobody had a question, which is specifically around diversity and racial diversity and equity and inclusion, and how that fits into your program with this in any way.
Sure. Well, I will say that as a law enforcement agency, I mean, we've had probably 4 or 5 different times over the last 6, 7 years. We've had, the standard trainings for law enforcement officers around recognizing implicit and explicit bias and those types of things. Some of that's been academy mandated. Some of it came from some different sources. So we've had a little bit of that as far as like training for the deputies. Probably the most significant area that we've addressed that with back 2 years ago, it was right after the Floyd homicide. We had a group of, probably at the time, it was probably almost 20 citizens from the county reach out to us and asked if they could meet with us regarding social and racial equity issues. And we agreed to meet with them. And we sat down at our first meeting. We didn't quite know what to expect, but it was really a group from, like I said, from all over the county of individuals that were really, they wanted to get to know law enforcement in their community better. They wanted to understand how the racial and social justice conversations and that were going around nationwide were affecting us and how we felt about the community. They were quite a diversity in the group. As far as there were some parents there of BIPOC children. We unfortunately didn't have anybody initially from the BIPOC community. So they wanted to get together. I kind of recognized that, we had a lot of people and they wanted to talk about a lot of things. And so to put some format to that, we reached out to Restorative Justice, and they came in as an organization and helped facilitate that meeting for a little while, which gave us a good community building circle kind of foundation for how we conducted the meetings. And then they actually, as a group, they went out and they got a grant that focused on this group that we were meeting with and wanting to further the work about education within our patrol division and within the community, and trying to bring in more voices and just have a broader conversation about this. So they got some grant funding. We used that to hire a facilitator for a little while to help us continue with that restorative model. Now we've basically got to the point where we run the meetings ourselves, and the group is a little smaller now. As usual, when things like that start, some people tend to fall away, but the group is still, the core of it's still pretty consistent. One of the things that we did as part of that group with that grant funding was we hired Dustin, a fellow who runs a company called It Is Time out of Southern Maine. He's a pastor, and or at least that's part of his education. He started this group. He is a member of the BIPOC community, and we hired him to come in and do a 6-part educational kind of training with the members of our group and the command staff that attends. Usually there's 4 of us, myself, the sheriff, my patrol lieutenant, and my jail administrator that attend those meetings on a regular basis. And so he came in and he did a training block that talked about the history of racism, all the way up through to modern times, talked about specifically some stuff around law enforcement and just trying to paint a broader picture about, like, where are these arguments coming from today? Why are we seeing what we're seeing? What is the history behind this? How do we move forward? One of the things that we did after that 6 series of trainings with him was we decided that we wanted to try to use some of the other grant funding to bring that training into some way into our patrol and corrections divisions. And so what we decided to do was he built a training specifically for our patrol and corrections guys to kind of give them an introduction to this. But as a lead into that, we wanted him to get to know our deputies. And our correctional staff. We wanted him to have an understanding of how we operate and what we do and who we have here and our philosophy. And we wanted our our officers to be able to get to know him and meet him before they just saw him at a training. We felt like that would make it more impactful and that they would be open to hear what he had to say and have put more value to it if they knew him as an individual rather than just, hey, this instructor we brought in from somewhere. So we set it up for him to come up and do a number of ride-alongs with our patrol deputies and to shadow in our reentry center for a few shifts. And he just completed that process, and we've just scheduled him to come in to do our department-wide training here in the next couple of weeks. And beyond that, we are working with him right now to think about, like, how do we move this more into the community with maybe some panel discussions, and working with our local news channel here in Belfast to maybe do a half-hour segment on the work that we've been doing. And so we've got all kinds of stuff going on around education within our own agency, connecting with the community around this. And so that's another whole realm of another whole Zoom call that we could do about some of the work we're kind of branching out into in that area.
Does that get at what you wanted?
It's going to take me a few hours of, I already see the chart on the wall with all the progressions of this. I'm going to spell it out. It's going to be like a military campaign. I'm going to be drawing out here. The amount of stuff that you've done and you've put together is mind-boggling. So I will boggle my mind with great excitement. As I said before, my goal is local government and bringing these kinds of activities to towns so that they know the kinds of power that they can exert with their other governmental agencies like the commissioners and, et cetera, to be able to access not just money, but respect and, a solid understanding of what's going on instead of just, I shouldn't diminish the cry to not have to pay more taxes, but that's sort of what everything comes down to in a lot of local towns is, well, that's going to cost tax money. And I would like to see that change into, well, that'll save us money by meeting these problems up front. So that's me.
Well, I'll tell you, just as you're forming that argument, everything that we have talked about today is all grant funded. The only thing that we have done that we have built into our budget was when we built Rob, that one liaison position into our budget. Everything else, even currently, the other liaisons, the option workers, the lead program, this community group, all of that has been funded by building the partnerships, building the connections, getting the foundation, applying for appropriate grants, funding it through that. So you can do a lot if you build, and that's why I talked initially about the recovery committee. If you build a network of people that are connecting with each other, talking with each other, all moving in the same direction with some common goals, you can use that as a tremendous base, a foundation to apply for grants. These grant folks, if you find an organization, like we found Volunteers of America, we got Robin Goff. Robin is a grant writing wizard, and she works for VOA, which is a huge national organization. So they have a super depth of reach if they need a resource. You get a partner like that in there, or a PCHC, or a Health Equity Alliance, and you start pulling some of that talent in. Those folks, when you got the foundation, can write some amazing grants and get, we have PCHC $1 million grant over 3 years to address the opioid crisis. Restorative Justice Project, they go out, they got a grant, $750,000 grant over 3 years to build justice centers over the prosecutorial district 6, largely based off the work we're doing. Volunteers of America, 3-year grant, $1 million for Project Connect, which is post-release case management for anyone returning to Waldo or Knox counties from the state or either one of the county correctional facilities, providing recovery coaching, all kinds of that stuff. Partner with Healthy Acadia around expanding grant funding to do our recovery coaching program. This does not have to cost a lot of money. What it takes is the right people in the right place that have the mindset to say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at doing this work differently. If you have somebody in a position, whether it's a district attorney, a sheriff, a chief of police, or any of these other different organizations who says, no, this is the way we've always done it. We're always going to do it this way. We're going to, arrest and incarcerate everybody, and that's what we do. Then you're probably not going to get change, because the minute you've got somebody that throws a cog into the wheel, it just doesn't work. You need to have the right people in the right place. But once you get them all to the table and you get the right mindset and everybody's pulling in the right direction, you can do a tremendous amount of work without having to cost your taxpayers a lot of money. But when it does come to that argument about how do you justify that, it is a little difficult. As I've said before, there's a lot of stuff that you can't necessarily put your finger on, but I can tell you that we have made a huge impact. When I was a jail administrator in 2008, our daily average population at the Waldo County Jail was usually 70 or better. Over the last few years, our daily average population is in the low to mid 20s. Fluctuates up a little higher sometimes. I've seen it down into the teens. So I look at that over a 15-year period and I say, how did we do that? We did it because, and our budgets have gone up a little bit, not as much on the correction side as it maybe on the patrol side. Our budgets have gone up a little bit, but really what it took was a shift in how we applied some of that budget. We have 2 pretrial case managers that are running darn near 200 people on pre or post release monitoring. Those people would be eating up bed days in our jail. We've got these types of programs. We've got the reentry center. All of that stuff begins to affect over time the fabric of the criminal justice system, how you approach people. And that's why it's important to have a collaborative of all of these individuals, because everybody along the criminal justice pipeline affects how many people you're just warehousing in your jail versus how many you're trying to get connected to the resources they need to stay the heck out of jail. Incarceration is incredibly expensive. You want to start talking about saving your taxpayers money, cut down on incarceration, because that is where you're going to spend a tremendous amount of money. The money is much better spent on treatment and connecting people with services than it is incarceration.
Community justice versus criminal justice.
Thank you so much for all of that. That's just gives us such a good record of where to go in this. It's really fantastic. And I was just wondering, just before we get up toward the end here, do you have connections with Hancock County at all, with either of those programs or with other things you do that might fit here? I know I was talking with Tim Richardson, who is the Hancock County Jail Administrator, and he mentioned, and I didn't get the details at the time, that there's a program you have going that they send people from the Hancock County Jail. And I wondered if you might talk about any of that.
I'm assuming he's talking about the reentry center. I don't know of anything other than that. When the reentry center was created, it was created back when Governor Baldacci announced the state takeover of county corrections. And then in the preceding years after that, there was that fell apart, but they didn't want to give up on it. So they created the Board of Corrections that was a state entity that oversaw county corrections. And then that took all kinds of different forms. And then under Governor LePage, that eventually fell apart, and complete control of the county jails, other than some funding pieces that are really weird, that are still going on today, has come back to the counties. But through that process, they originally planned on shutting down 3 jails, Waldo, Oxford, and Franklin, and then redirecting our population to larger facilities, flagship facilities. So our sheriff at the time, Scott Story, said, hey, we want to become a reentry center. And the plan was to create one of these reentry centers in 4 of them total across the state, us being the first one, and they'd have 4 districts and everybody would have one. Well, over the years, that took that whole thing dissolved. But we have always maintained our reentry center. Once we got it up and going, we saw the value of it and we've maintained it. So originally we took people from all over the state because of the way things were funded and structured, and it was a statewide system. Now that it's come back to the counties, we've really kind of shifted away from some of that, like taking, I can't really ask Waldo County taxpayers to take people from Hancock and Aroostook and everywhere else. So we've really pulled that back and focused on our own prosecutorial district, especially our relationship with Hancock County. So they hold our regular inmate population to a certain amount. We guarantee them 10 beds at the reentry center. So they send it to us and we compensate that, back and forth for that. So we have this relationship with our neighbor, Knox County, to really do that. So on occasion, we will, if we get a special request from another county like Hancock, and they say, hey, I've got this person and they really need the reentry center. And if we have room, there are occasions where we will do that. But it's just the way that things are structured now. We really focus specifically on us and Knox, and we're having a series of conversations right now about a prosecutorial 6 correctional collaboration between us, Knox, and Two Bridges. And there'll be a press release coming out soon about that, which will allow us to share inmates and all that good stuff. So I'm assuming that he's talking about our reentry center. We have taken folks from Hancock before. It's just not something that we can do on a regular basis. But
Okay, thank you very much. So we are right up at the time that we had said. Does anybody have other questions?
you have my email address.
Yes.
If you guys think of something afterwards that you want to ask about, or if there's a resource you want to know about, or if you want to get in touch with some of the folks I've talked about, like Robin Goff or VOA folks or whatever, just don't hesitate, shoot me an email. I'll get you connected to whoever I can or wherever I can, or answer whatever questions you may have.
Okay, thank you ever so much. We will have the recording here and I'll send you the link so you have it as a reference for when you want to share information about what you're doing.
Okay, great.
And gosh, we appreciate this. This has been really great. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Thank
wish you
you.
all the best of luck. And if you need anything from us in the future, don't hesitate to reach out.